She stood there for hours, just standing, her coat buttoned wrong, her purse clutched like a lifeline. Cars passed. People walked by. Some glanced. Most didn't. One guy filmed her for TikTok. Another muttered, "Probably crazy," and kept walking. But Jamal noticed her. 17. Tired from his shift at the grocery store, arms full of bags. He stopped. "Ma'am? You okay?" She looked at him like she was seeing a face for the first time in days. "I think I'm lost," she whispered. That was the moment. The one no one else cared about. But he did. He took her hand. And everything changed. Jamal didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't even old enough to vote. But something about the way she looked at him, scared, confused, like the world had moved on without her, made it impossible to walk away. So he stayed. He sat her down on the bench outside the corner bakery, gave her his bottled water, tried not to stare too long at the smudges on her clothes or the scratches on her shoes. She looked like someone's grandmother who had wandered off during a church picnic. But this wasn't a park. It was downtown, cold, loud, dangerous. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Margaret." He waited. But that's all she offered. "Do you know where you live?" She shook her head. He didn't want to call the cops. He'd seen what happened when young black men tried to help in public. They either got ignored or accused. But leaving her wasn't an option. So he called his mom. 10 minutes later, his mother pulled up in her minivan. At first she looked suspicious. A wrinkled white lady alone on a bench with her son. But as soon as Margaret looked up and smiled, her face softened. They brought Margaret home, gave her tea, let her shower. Jamal's little sister loaned her a sweater. For a few hours, Margaret just sat in their living room, quiet, watching cartoons with a blanket over her knees like she belonged there. Jamal's mom made calls. Shelters, hospitals, the police. But no one had reported a missing woman matching her description. No ID in the purse. No phone. Nothing but a worn-out lipstick tube, a crushed candy wrapper, and a bus ticket from a town no one recognized. That night, as the city lights blinked outside, Margaret stood in the hallway staring at a photo on the wall, Jamal's graduation picture. "You look like him," she said. "Who?" Jamal asked. But she didn't answer, just smiled, and shuffled off to bed. The next day the video went viral. Someone had filmed Jamal holding Margaret's hand at the bus stop and posted it with the caption, "Only one person stopped, and it was a kid." Millions watched. Comments poured in, some praising him, others accusing the family of exploiting the woman for clout. A reporter showed up, then another, then a van, from a morning show. Jamal hated it. Margaret barely understood what was happening. She just kept asking, "Is Harold here yet?" over and over. They still didn't know who Harold was. On the third day, a black SUV pulled up outside their house. A woman in a tailored suit stepped out. Sunglasses, heels, the kind of calm that made you nervous. She introduced herself as Cassandra Bishop, said she was Margaret's legal advisor. "She's been missing for 2 weeks," Cassandra said. "We've been searching discreetly, for reasons I can't yet explain." That's when she dropped the bomb. Margaret Langston is the sole heir to the Langston estate. Langston and Gray, the investment firm, she's worth close to $400 million. Jamal blinked. His mom sat down, slowly, like her legs had forgotten how to work. "She's been slipping in and out of lucidity since her husband died. Early signs of dementia, but she's sharp when she wants to be," Cassandra said. "She must have wandered away from her driver. This isn't the first time she's disappeared." But no one called the police. Jamal's mom asked. They didn't want the media frenzy. She's a very private person, and very stubborn. That night, Margaret asked for Jamal to sit beside her. She looked clearer somehow, her eyes focused. You remind me of my Harold, she whispered. He used to bring me lilacs on Sundays, always had scraped up knees, always asking questions. Jamal smiled. He sounds like a good guy. He was the only good thing in a very cruel family. Then she touched his hand. I want to change my will. He laughed. Thought she was joking, but she wasn't. Cassandra confirmed it. She's completely within her rights to amend it. What? Why? Jamal asked. Because you saw her, Cassandra said, when no one else did. By the end of the week, Margaret's face was on every news channel. The woman who vanished. The boy who found her. The heirloom ring she gave Jamal before leaving. And the line she repeated in every interview they let her do. He saved me. I want the world to know that. But the real story, the one cameras missed, wasn't about money or fame. It was about a lonely woman who didn't want to be forgotten, and a boy who refused to ignore her. The weeks that followed felt like walking through someone else's dream. Jamal couldn't go anywhere without someone stopping him. At school, teachers asked for selfies. Kids who never spoke to him before suddenly wanted to sit with him at lunch. Reporters camped outside their apartment. One talk show even sent a limousine to take him and his mom to New York. They declined. But through it all, Jamal stayed grounded. Because every time the noise got too loud, he thought of Margaret sitting on that bench cold and quiet, and how no one had stopped but him. She called once a week, sometimes more, depending on how clear her mind was. The conversations didn't always make sense. Sometimes she thought he was Harold, sometimes she just wanted to hear about his day. But she always ended with the same words. Don't let them change you. Then came the envelope. Thick, heavy, embossed with gold. It was hand-delivered by a man in a charcoal suit who refused to give his name. Inside was a legal document, an official trust, signed and notarized. Margaret had done it. She'd left Jamal a portion of her estate. Not all of it. Not even most. But enough to change everything. There were conditions. The money was to be used only for education, housing, or building something that helped people who had been forgotten. If he accepted, the funds would be managed by a board of trustees until he turned 25. Jamal stared at the papers for hours. He could barely afford school lunches some days. Now he had the power to change lives. He wasn't sure he deserved it, but his mom, who had worked 2 jobs for as long as he could remember, just hugged him and said, "She saw something in you. Maybe it's time you saw it too." He signed. The first thing he did was start a non-profit. It was small at first. Just him, his best friend Mullick, and their history teacher. They called it the Margaret Project. Their mission: help elderly people living alone, especially those struggling with memory loss. They delivered meals, cleaned homes, sat and listened to stories no one else had time for. News spread fast. Donations came pouring in, grants, volunteers. A retired nurse offered free training. A grocery store chain donated supplies. Within 6 months they had a van. A year later they had 5. People called him a prodigy, a hero, a symbol of hope. But Jamal never forgot where it started, with a lost woman who liked lilacs and cartoons. Then, one day, the calls stopped. No more weekly check-ins. No one answered Margaret's phone. Worried, he contacted Cassandra. She flew out to see him. Margaret had passed in her sleep, Cassandra said, peacefully, quietly, just as she'd lived those last few months. She'd left him a letter. It wasn't long, just 3 sentences. Jamal, this world rarely rewards kindness, but sometimes it remembers. You reminded me who I was. Be proud of who you are, Jamal. He cried for the first time in months. The funeral was private, just a few people. Cassandra, a driver, a nurse, and Jamal. She was buried next to her husband. Her headstone read, Margaret Langston, a woman of grace, found at last. That night, Jamal stood alone in the cemetery. Cold wind, dark sky. No cameras. No likes. No noise. Just silence. But in that silence, he felt something settle inside him. A sense of purpose. Not because of the money. Not because of the fame. But because someone had believed in him when the world didn't care. He made her a promise. To keep seeing the invisible. To keep choosing compassion when no one else would. And for the rest of his life, he did. Years passed. The Margaret Project grew beyond anything Jamal had imagined. It expanded into 3 cities. Volunteers wore bright yellow jackets with a simple logo, a hand reaching out to another. They launched memory cafes for seniors with dementia, built safe housing units for those aging without family, opened a 24-hour hotline. By the time Jamal was 22, the foundation had helped over 10,000 people. He was invited to speak at universities, conferences, even Congress. But every time someone asked, "How did this all begin?" he gave the same answer. With a lost woman on a park bench. He never used Margaret's last name, unless asked. Not because he wanted to protect her identity. She had made peace with the world before she left. But because he believed her story didn't belong to wealth. It belonged to humanity. Despite everything, Jamal stayed in the same neighborhood, lived in a modest apartment above a florist. Still ate at the same diner with Malik every Saturday morning. Still visited Margaret's grave on the 18th of every month. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at the office. Handwritten, elegant script. No return address. Inside was a photograph. An old one, faded and creased. It showed Margaret, maybe in her 30s, standing beside a tall man in military dress. Both were smiling. On the back of the photo were just 4 words. "There's more to tell." Attached was a phone number. Jamal hesitated for days. Who had sent it? Why now? Finally, curiosity won. He called. A woman answered. Her voice was calm, refined. "You're Jamal, I assume." "Yes, ma'am. My name is Evelyn Devereaux. Margaret was my sister." Jamal blinked. "I didn't know she had family." "That's by design," she said. "There are things you don't know, things we all tried to forget." Evelyn lived in Vermont. She invited him to visit. When he arrived, he found a white cottage surrounded by pine trees and silence. Evelyn greeted him at the door. Elegant, silver-haired, eyes sharp as glass. Over tea, she began to unravel a history buried beneath decades of silence. Margaret and Harold hadn't just been rich, they had been powerful. Their wealth came from a pharmaceutical dynasty. Harold had been a decorated doctor during wartime. Margaret, a mathematician who broke code in the Cold War. But something happened. A scandal. Evelyn wouldn't give details, only said that Harold had made a mistake, and Margaret had paid the price. She walked away from everything. Evelyn said. Chose exile. Said money was poison. We thought she was crazy. She wasn't. Jamal said quietly. No, she was kind, and brave, and lonely. Evelyn opened a dusty old box and handed him a worn leather notebook. It was Margaret's journal. Most of it was faded, some entries barely legible. But one stood out, dated just a month before they met. I've been walking these streets for days. People don't see me. I'm invisible. I miss Harold. I miss being someone. But even more, I miss being seen. Jamal swallowed hard. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his. You gave her that. You gave her peace. I don't know why she chose you, but I'm grateful she did. Before he left, Evelyn handed him another envelope. Inside was a check for $5 million, and a note that read, for the work you've already done, and the work you're about to do. Jamal didn't say yes, didn't say no, just nodded, tucked it into his jacket, and drove home. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his apartment, journal open in his lap, surrounded by candles. And he realized something. The Margaret Project wasn't just about service. It was about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. Not in buildings or dollars, but in moments, in the lives we change without knowing. The next morning, Jamal stood before his team. "We're going national," he said. "It's time." They clapped, cheered, hugged. But he was already thinking ahead. There were so many more Margarets out there, waiting, hoping, forgotten, and he would find them. 2 years later, Jamal stood backstage at the Kennedy Center, adjusting his tie. The room was buzzing. A national award ceremony was being held in his honor, the youngest recipient ever of the Human Dignity Medal. A crowd of senators, philanthropists, and celebrities waited in the velvet-lined auditorium. Jamal, though, didn't feel like a hero. Not that night. Because just a week earlier, one of their shelters in Ohio had lost a resident. Miss Linda May, 87, slipped through the system. A caseworker missed a call. A transportation mix-up. No one's fault. And yet, it was. Jamal had flown out to her funeral. Small, quiet, no flowers. He stood alone, soaked by freezing rain, and whispered, "I'm sorry." That pain stayed with him. As he stepped up to the podium under the spotlights, he looked out at the sea of faces, and didn't read the speech written for him. Instead, he said this: "You're applauding me, but I almost didn't stop that day in the park. I almost walked right past her. I had my headphones in. I was late for work. I told myself it wasn't my problem. But something, I don't know what, made me turn around." He paused. "Margaret wasn't wealthy when I met her. Not to me. She was just scared, alone, confused. She needed someone to sit down, listen, and hold her hand." He scanned the room. How many other people are we walking past right now? How many more Margarets are on benches we don't see? The crowd was still, silent, listening. "She gave me everything. Not her money, her time, her story, her belief in me. And in return, I made a promise. That no one should grow old alone. That no one should be invisible." A slow rising applause filled the theater. But Jamal didn't smile. He stepped down, heart heavy, mind racing. Because he knew the truth. One speech, one shelter, one act of kindness wasn't enough. The system was still broken. Too many fell through the cracks. And he was just one man. Tired, overwhelmed, and still fighting. Backstage, as the press lined up for interviews, he slipped out a side door. He needed air. Outside, it had started to snow. Quiet flakes falling on the marble steps. He pulled out his phone, not to check messages, but to open that old photo of Margaret, the one where she was young, laughing, standing beside Harold. He stared at it for a long time. Then he opened her journal again, scrolling to a sentence he'd underlined months ago. "The world only changes when someone stays to listen." That night, he walked the city. No entourage, no cameras, just him. And every time he saw someone sitting alone, on a bench or a stoop, he stopped, asked if they needed anything. Sometimes it was socks, other times, silence. He never said his name, but someone must have recognized him, because the next morning, a blurry photo was circulating online. Jamal, kneeling beside an old man, holding his hand, both of them laughing. The caption read, "He never stopped," and it was true, he didn't.